So good afternoon. So I'm going to be talking about Somali families, but secondary migrant Somali families in Birmingham. My research was completed with my colleague Özlem Young, and was part of the project that Kelly and Catherine have also done their research with. The interesting thing about this research is that we did this with secondary migrant families. So these were families that had claimed citizenship, say in the Netherlands or Denmark, and then had decided to come to Britain and actually make Birmingham their home. It was a really interesting way in which we got into this, because we were doing a piece with, we were doing a session with young Muslims, with Birmingham Citizens UK, and it was really interesting because we were doing a session around young Muslims and some of the big issues that they kind of, we thought that they would kind of be encountering. And when we were speaking to them, they started talking about how they were fearful they may not be able to go to university, that they may not be able to, so that they may have to pay more than a home student. And we was like, well, we weren't expecting this. We was expecting, issues around kind of discrimination or so on. And one of the reasons was because all of this, a vast majority were of Somali heritage, but we also had citizenship in, say, Denmark, Finland, or so on, but had actually come here with their parents, or their parents had come here, and Birmingham had become their home. So it was really interesting the way in which we kind of stumbled across this piece of research, and in many ways they've kind of become a kind of invisible victim of the Brexit referendum. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some quotes up and then kind of talk over that, so just to try and give you a bit of a flavour of the kind of feelings and kind of elucidate on the way in which we began to unpack this. So very much part of this, we interviewed 10 families, so we spoke to families, and overall we spoke to around about 24 people. The youngest was 16, the eldest was in the late 40s. So some, and we left that notion of family open to themselves in the way in which they wanted to kind of refer to that. Those that we spoke to had citizenship in Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark, Finland and Poland. And the Poland one's really interesting. I'll come back to that just a little bit later. But one of the things that we saw was that there was very much this kind of sense that Birmingham was home. And there was this very much sense that actually there was a kind of emotional bond between themselves and the families and Birmingham. They lived their kind of day-to-day life and they experienced Birmingham in that kind of normal, kind of homely way. And really what we saw was that a lot of the time when we spoke to them about why does Birmingham feel like home, it was because so many of their milestones in their life had been experienced there. So people had got their jobs, or they'd gone to university, or they'd gone to school. And they kind of, so that notion of home was very similar in the same way in which most people experience that. There was a couple of kind of interesting things that kind of came out in the kind of talk. There was one of the things was that actually most people on deciding to come to Birmingham had come to Birmingham because they felt that actually Birmingham was a tolerant space. So there was a space where they could be themselves, where they could be Somali, but also Muslim as well. And one of the big things with Somali women was that actually they felt they could dress in the way that they wanted to and be able to maintain their culture without necessarily encountering too much discrimination in terms of that. And so what you get is that on the bottom, it's the last quote I like, this is this guy who's kind of moved between lots of different countries, and he calls himself Mohammed Sweden. He says there's lots of Mohammeds in Birmingham, but you can call me Mohammed Sweden, but actually Birmingham is my home. So you get this kind of nice kind of sense that actually that Birmingham is very much was seen to be home prior to the Brexit referendum. When we spoke to them about their kind of initial responses, it was very much the same response that most Remainers would have kind of given. There was this kind of surprise. The families didn't expect there to be to vote to actually sort of leave Europe, and there was this very much the sense as though you were talking to anybody really in terms of Remain. I guess the one thing that was slightly different was there was a couple of families that we spoke to, and that they told us that immediately there was this kind of immediate response from some within their kind of family networks or within their friend networks, where immediately they decided to leave Britain and return back to Sweden or back to Denmark as another family did. So one of the things was that on the whole the response was one of shock, but also shock enough to actually make some begin to respond immediately and leave. And then what we get is this kind of so one of the ways in which we're kind of trying to frame this is around the kind of politics of belonging. And the politics of belonging is, working on Ewell Davis's work, and as it's described as the kind of the dirty work of boundary maintenance. So what we get is this idea that there's a kind of political mechanism or political act which actually acts in ways which it demarcates us, so people don't feel as though they belong anymore. And one of the key things that we found with our research was that actually this is exactly what the Brexit referendum did. It made the Somali families that we speak to, immediately made them question their sense of where they belong. So home was very much a kind of emotional attachment. Belonging was very much about they belong to Birmingham, they're very much a part of Britain, they saw their future there. But actually with the Brexit referendum, what we saw was this immediate kind of point where it gives a sense of otherness. It demarcates whether you can belong and those who can't belong. And it's really interesting, the kind of middle quote there, is that they talk about drawing a line. And this idea that there's a line which is sort of drawn, which then stops people from being able to kind of like sort of a line of segregation. And so people that actually sort of were very much a part of Britain, very much a part of Birmingham, were very much, didn't question their identity or their sense of belonging or home, very much immediately afterwards then began to. And so one of the things that we get is this idea that sort of, what was really interesting, I talk about the Polish citizen that we spoke to. We came across one family where there was a woman who was originally a Somali refugee. She claimed Swedish citizenship and then came to Birmingham. And then she married a Polish citizen who had converted to Islam when he had come to Birmingham. And what we got here is this kind of response when we're talking about what is home, where is home, how do you understand home? The one thing that we really came out of this was actually this notion here, and they spoke about home. We don't have a home. So the Somali woman, she could have returned to Sweden, but she didn't see that as being home. She could have returned to Somalia, but she didn't see that as being home. She saw Birmingham as being home. The Polish husband, he didn't see Poland as being home. He saw his family and the family home to be Birmingham. And this was really interesting because they were like, well, where next? The Polish guy doesn't want to go to Sweden or Somalia. The Swedish woman doesn't want to go to Poland. And, so their only home was Birmingham. And yet what happened with the referendum was it actually immediately made them question, well, where is our home? And as it says there, it's like, so where next? Neither of us have a home. So that's very quickly an overview of the research. If you want to read a little bit more, you can, myself and Özlem have co-written a piece for the Sociological Review blog, and you can get that from tinyurl.com/brum.somali. Thanks so much.